Good morning. This is Steve, and we are again at the Fairfield Seventh-day Adventist Church. And thank you to those of you who watched last week, and especially to the one who responded to the announcements of this week's topic by saying that you presumed that our talking about resilience didn't, how was it that you put it, didn't involve a couple of glasses of wine every evening. I really found your humor beneficial. So this week starts the third series, and it's entitled Jesus' Strength, and today is all about Atlas. Bible passage for the day is drawn from Ephesians chapter 6, which is the closing chapter of Ephesians. Ephesians starts with a celebration of the gifts that were given in Jesus, and it ends with Paul's summary, what he thinks is important, what he was trying to say. Finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might. Now, there once was this muscular, buff, ape-chested, this is the real me at age 15, okay? Flat-chested, scrawny, awkward to the extreme, and totally insecure, okay? And this scrawny, awkward 15-year-old kept seeing these advertisements in magazines from this guy called Charles Atlas. Okay, and the advertisements usually went something like this: bully insults scrawny kid on the beach. His girlfriend despises the scrawny kid because he puts up with it. Kid goes back, is angry, orders his free book from Charles Atlas, follows the instructions, and comes back a few weeks later, slaps the bully around, regains his girl, regains his self-respect, and looks buff. Let me tell you, these advertisements were really appealing to this scrawny 15-year-old, okay? I mean, I wanted to look like Charles Atlas so much. And I think there are a lot of Christians today who can really identify with this. We feel scrawny and totally unacceptable because we know our lives don't live up to the promise of what we were sold on. Okay? I wish there was a Charles Atlas for Christians to send off and get a free 15-minute a day.
Make a new man.
Make a new man. Absolutely. Is that what Paul's talking about? Is this what he means when he says, be strong in the Lord? Come on, Gerald. Buff up. Be a man. Okay? Be a woman. Paul goes on to say, put on the whole armor of God, that ye may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. Put on the whole armor of God. Not something that we can really relate to today, because how many of us see men walking around in armor? The Roman army was the first professional army in the Mediterranean basin, the Mediterranean cultures. Up until this point, rich folks bought armor for their boys when they sent them off to battle. The rest of us had to scrounge whatever we could find in the garbage heaps and put together whatever we could. The Roman army wasn't that way. The state paid for every soldier's armor. So they were fully equipped when they went into battle. So their armor consisted of a helmet to protect the head from blows, the cuirass, what we often talk about as a breastplate, but it actually covered the shoulders, the whole chest, abdomen, okay? And it was designed to protect against stabbing injuries, like from swords or spears. The belt, well, it was much more than a belt, okay, because it had this flap hanging down in the front that was designed so that when a sword or a spear slipped off of the cuirass, it didn't just go down into the places that we guys don't like to get hit, okay? So it was called the groin protector. And then there were hobnail boots, okay? Multiple layers of leather with conical spikes in them, which helped them not to slip on slippery ground, but also made it quite effective when they stomped on an enemy. So it was part of armor and a part of a weapon. And then they also had a sword, shield, and a spear, which was actually for throwing, not for jabbing. Now, there was nothing magic about this armor. It was copied from the nations around them, the Greeks, the Celts, the Gauls, little pieces from everywhere, but then refined just a little bit. For example, the throwing spear that they used, it was designed so that on impact, it crumpled. So that your enemy couldn't just pick up the spear that you had thrown at him and throw it back at you. It was a one-way ticket. Now, they had armorers following right along behind the army, who then would go over the battlefield, pick up all the spears that they had thrown, and straighten them out for the next battle. Okay? That was part of what made the Roman army so effective, is that they actually thought about the weapons and designed them. They also trained in using their equipment together. And one of the classic moves was the testodo, or the turtle. Okay? When arrows and rocks started flying through the air, they bunched together, held the shields up in front, held the shields up over the top. It wasn't perfect, but let me tell you, they were a lot more protected than their enemies, who were just running around, each man for himself, trying to catch every spear and every arrow that was coming through the air. Okay?
Well, police do that today when you go to mobs and stuff.
Yeah, riot police still use this today. It only went out of favor with the advent of explosives and gunpowder, okay? Because shields no longer were effective. Now, all of this equipment, which was great, came at a price. When a Roman soldier went into battle, he was carrying at least 50 pounds of armor and weapons. Can you imagine running with a 50-pound sack of flour on your back? Okay? And then try imagine fighting. Okay? To be physically capable of doing that, all of their practice sessions had to be in full armor. And this was metal armor. And, well, yeah, they had some woolen underwear that they wore underneath of the armor, but this was hot, it was uncomfortable, and it was heavy, and they had to practice every day to be ready for the battles. Now that was just part of it, okay? Because that was just going into battle, but how do you get there? There were no cars. There were no armored divisions. You had to walk. And when they were walking, they had to carry 7 days of food. Each two-man unit had to carry a tent and bedding and stakes to contribute to the fence around the perimeter around the camp. Okay? All told, each soldier was carrying upwards of 100 pounds of equipment. And they had a real technological innovation. They took a long pole and put a cross pole on it, so it was like a cross, and they tied all their gear onto that, and they carried that over their shoulder. Okay. When we talk about the soldiers of the cross, that's actually what they called the Roman soldiers, because of the equipment. Now, this gentleman, Edward Gibbons, okay, he wrote a classic back in the Victorian era called The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. It's a 6-volume series, and if you can read 250 words a minute, it only takes about 73 hours to read the whole thing. I can't read 250 words a minute, and I can't read 8 hours a day, okay? It took me 9 months to get through, and my son says I am the only living person that he knows of who's ever read this. But, okay, regardless of that, Edward Gibbons, one of the things that he points out in his book, one of the sources that he found, a Roman author writing in the late Roman Empire era, reported that the Roman soldiers in their annual negotiations with the emperor, because the emperor paid the army directly, and you think labor management negotiations are tense today? 50% of Roman emperors were assassinated by the army during the negotiations of their annual pay. Okay? This was tense negotiation, and they could only push the pay up so high before the emperor said, kill me, I can't get it. Okay? So they started negotiating for working conditions, kind of like American workers today. Okay? And one of the things the Roman soldiers negotiated was that they didn't have to wear their armor while they practiced. It was hot, it was heavy, it was uncomfortable, and they didn't want to do it. And the emperor said, okay. But then when it came time for battle, they hadn't been practicing in their armor, and it was hot, and it was uncomfortable, and it cramped their style. And according to Gibbons, and according to the Roman author he was referring to, in the late Roman Empire, the Roman soldiers were actually going into battle without a stitch of armor on them. They carried a shield, a sword, and a throwing spear, but all their armor was gone. They were going into battle no more protected than the barbarians that they were fighting. Now, today we have other sources beyond what Gibbons had, and we know that that's not quite how simple it was. The fact is, many Roman soldiers were going into battle without armor at the end, but often it wasn't their choice. The empire was going broke. They couldn't produce enough armor for all the soldiers. So the first few lines of soldiers in the battle would be fully equipped, and the rest would get the leftovers. So the further you were back in the lineup, the less equipment you had, and you just hoped that the enemy the battle didn't come back to you. But regardless of the cause, the result was the same. The Roman armies, the Roman soldiers, were now vulnerable to their enemies. Verse 12, for we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against powers, and against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Yeah, spiritual warfare. Okay? This is something that can really get us men excited, you know. Our juices start flowing. Yeah, warfare, let's go, you know. And we put out whole movies about war room and things that evoke these images. And we end up in the ditch on either side of the Christian pathway. And the world laughs at us because they know we're in the ditch. Now, what am I talking about? Okay? The first ditch is on the right-hand side of the road. It's the ditch of warfare. You know, a Christian is involved in warfare when they're so preoccupied with pointing out the faults of other religions and other churches, and they spend most of their time and they get really excited talking about the faults of other people. Not just churches, not just religious people. You know, we end up talking about the people in our family. You know, oh, he is despicable. And the people at work, oh, it just makes my blood boil. And don't get me started on the people in the community. You know, and once we're excited about the faults in the people in the community, then that sweeps us right into politics. And once we're in politics, oh my goodness, do you realize? Okay, and we get into issues like abortion and prayer in schools and rainbow rights. And Christians get all upset about the issues. Now don't misunderstand me. I believe there is truth. I believe that God's law is meaningful. That's why I keep the Sabbath. That's why I don't lie. I don't steal. I don't cheat on my wife. I believe that God asked us to do those things for a very real purpose. And I don't believe that he's fickle and changes his law, his rules, his requests of us on his whim. He says he's the same yesterday, today, and forever. Okay? But when we find ourselves swept into conflict with people, we are in the ditch. Now the King James sometimes uses antique language. Here's a contemporary version, and it spells it out really clear. We are not fighting against humans. Get it? If you're fighting against humans, you're in the ditch. If your spiritual energies get really ramped up talking about humans, you're in the ditch. Which brings us to the second ditch, spiritual. See, if we're not talking about people, we must be talking about spiritual. And when we are in this ditch, we just ignore the world around us. Okay? We ignore the physical realities. We're talking about spiritual things. And we focus on the spiritual and the spiritual only. And we talk about prayer and about faith and about angels watching over me and about Holy Spirit, come down, power. Don't you feel it now? Now don't misunderstand me. I believe that prayer and faith are integral to the Christian experience and the Christian walk. I believe that angels are walking right alongside us, trying to guide and protect us. I believe in the power of the Holy Spirit, like I told you last week. But if this is where our focus is, and we don't also see the injustice in the world around us, and the needs of the people around us, and the physical realities that we operate within, we're in the ditch. What am I talking about? This summer, Vivian and I went to visit our daughter in New Zealand. We did not fly first class.
Ask that. Did we fly first class?
Yes, this is my wife. Don't you recognize me? Okay. We were back. We were back with the rest of humanity, and I can identify with every single person in this picture, okay? The food was horrible. The lines at the bathroom never ended. The guy behind me was snoring like a freight engine, and I didn't sleep at all on the 18-hour flight across the Pacific.
Look at the lady up front. Just, no, it's okay.
I knew you'd love that. Okay, and then we get to Dallas, and we're in the airport terminal, and you all know how peaceful and restful and calming airport terminals. No, they're designed like cattle or barns. Herd them through. Okay, and there's announcements going off every 2 minutes. Bobby, you left your Rubik's Cube. Okay. Oh man. And by the end of 36 hours of travel, which included 24 hours in planes and then another 12 hours in airport terminals, this is Steve inside. Okay? Now, on the outside, I'm perfectly calm. Okay? I do the man thing. I clam up. And I think I'm doing it so well until my wife innocently asks me, honey, would you like me to go and get us some food? Yes! And she looked at me with this wounded look, and okay, I was anything but strong in the Lord. I was so fragile at this moment. Okay, not fragile as in no, fragile as in explode. Quiet.
No rest.
Yes. Typically, we blame the people around us when we are fragile. Those people on the plane, those airlines, that airport terminal made me feel this way. No, I was fragile because I hadn't had any sleep. I hadn't eaten anything but junk food for 36 hours. I was dehydrated. I hadn't been taking care of myself physically or emotionally or spiritually. And all it took was 36 hours, and I turned into this. Now, I'm like most Christians. The just shall live by faith. Okay. In secular culture, we have to say it another way. Mind over matter. If you just set your mind to it, you can do anything. In Christianity, we say, well, if you just stay in touch with the Lord. This year, I've become to realize that faith works. Faith is the life we live. The life we live is our faith. And the righteousness that faith produces either strengthens us, the life we live either strengthens us in our battle against temptation and trauma, or it weakens us. Caring for the body is one of those strengths. Wait a minute. What's spiritual about caring for the body? Paul says it's the temple of God. And every time we treat the body as if it is inconsequential, or we ignore caring for the body, we are in the ditch. We are throwing away our armor. And it's no surprise that we find ourselves weak and vulnerable against the wiles of the devil. So, for the rest of our time here in church, we're going to be sharing and exploring other sources of strength, other parts of the Christian faith that strengthen us against temptation, help us to deal with the trauma and the pain that life throws at us. When I'm talking about resilience, bouncing back, I'm not talking about getting knocked down and pretending like nothing happened. I'm talking about genuine strength. So, at home, okay, I would encourage you to examine your own experience. I'm not going to be teaching from this point on. I don't have a prepared list of all of the strengths here. We here in the church are going to be sharing our own spiritual walks and the things that we have learned about when we are strong and when we are weak. I'd encourage you to do the same thing at home. Find another Christian to share with and learn from. And let me know what you discover. Have a good day.